The grocery store was buzzing with the usual mid-morning crowd. Shoppers moved through the aisles, their carts clattering against the linoleum floor. The hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional beep of a scanner. Near the dairy section, a black man in a wheelchair was quietly selecting a carton of milk. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a weight that hinted at a life filled with both struggle and strength. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, but do you even belong here?" All eyes turned to a middle-aged woman with a tight frown and crossed arms. Her tone was dripping with disdain as she glared at the man. He paused, his hand still on the milk carton, and looked up at her. "I'm just shopping, ma'am," he replied evenly, his voice steady but firm. The woman wasn't satisfied. She stepped closer, her voice rising. "People like you shouldn't be allowed in places like this. You're taking up space, and you're making everyone uncomfortable." The store fell silent. Shoppers froze, their eyes darting between the woman and the man. Some looked away, unsure of what to do. Others whispered to each other, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort. The man took a deep breath, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "I have just as much right to be here as anyone else," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable strength. The woman sneered. "Right? What right? You're just a burden on society. Always have been, always will be." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud. The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned his wheelchair slightly, as if to move away. But the woman wasn't done. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she spat. "Well, you're not. You're nothing." The tension was unbearable. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire store was holding its breath. Then, from the back of the crowd, a small voice broke the silence. "Stop it." Everyone turned to see a young boy, no more than 10 years old, stepping forward. His face was red, and his hands were clenched into fists. He walked straight up to the woman and looked her in the eye. "You're being mean," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "He's a hero. He fought for our country. And you're just being a bully." The woman blinked, taken aback. The boy's words seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. For a moment, no one knew what would happen next. Then, the man in the wheelchair spoke again, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "Thank you, son," he said to the boy. "But it's okay. Some people just don't understand." The boy shook his head. "No, it's not okay. You're a good person. And she's wrong." The woman opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The crowd, emboldened by the boy's courage, began to murmur. A few people stepped forward, their faces set with determination. "Leave him alone," one man said firmly. "Yeah, you should be ashamed of yourself," added another. The woman looked around, her face flushing with anger and embarrassment. For a moment, it seemed like she might argue further. But then, without a word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the store. The man in the wheelchair watched her go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the boy and gave him a small, grateful smile. "You're a brave kid," he said. "Thank you." The boy nodded, his anger fading into a shy smile. "You're welcome." As the crowd slowly dispersed, the man finished his shopping and wheeled himself to the checkout. But the incident wasn't over. In fact, it was just the beginning. The man in the wheelchair left the grocery store that day with more than just a carton of milk. He carried with him the weight of the incident, the sting of the woman's words, and the warmth of the young boy's courage. As he wheeled himself down the sidewalk, his mind drifted back to the life he had built, a life marked by both unimaginable pain and unshakable resilience. Years ago, he had been a soldier, serving his country with pride. He had always believed in the values of duty, honor, and sacrifice. But one fateful day, everything changed. During a mission overseas, an explosion ripped through his unit. He remembered the deafening noise, the blinding light, and then, nothing. When he woke up in a hospital bed days later, he learned the devastating truth: he had lost both his legs. The months that followed were a blur of surgeries, physical therapy, and emotional turmoil. He struggled to adjust to his new reality, grappling with feelings of anger, grief, and helplessness. But deep down, he knew he had a choice: he could let his circumstances define him, or he could rise above them. He chose the latter. With unwavering determination, he learned to navigate life in a wheelchair. He rebuilt his strength, both physically and mentally, and found ways to reclaim his independence. He took up adaptive sports, joined a veterans support group, and even started volunteering at a local community center. Through it all, he never lost his sense of purpose or his belief in the goodness of people. But life wasn't without its challenges. He faced discrimination and prejudice more times than he could count. People often underestimated him, assuming that his disability made him less capable or less deserving of respect. He had grown accustomed to the stares, the whispers, and the occasional cruel remark. Still, he refused to let bitterness take root in his heart. Instead, he focused on the positive. He found joy in small moments: a kind word from a stranger, the laughter of children at the community center, the feeling of the sun on his face as he wheeled himself through the park. He became a source of inspiration for those around him, a living testament to the power of perseverance and grace. The incident at the grocery store was just another chapter in his story. As he made his way home that day, he couldn't help but think about the young boy who had stood up for him. The boy's bravery had touched him deeply, reminding him that there was still so much good in the world. When he arrived at his modest apartment, he was greeted by the familiar sight of his service dog, a loyal golden retriever who had been by his side for years. The dog wagged its tail excitedly, sensing his return. He smiled and reached down to scratch behind its ears. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "It's been a day, hasn't it?" As he unpacked his groceries, his mind wandered to the woman who had confronted him. He wondered what had driven her to say those things. Was it fear? Ignorance? Pain? He didn't know, but he couldn't bring himself to hate her. Instead, he felt a strange sense of pity. That evening, as he sat by the window watching the sunset, he made a decision. He wouldn't let the incident define him. He would continue to live his life with dignity and kindness, no matter what challenges came his way. But little did he know, the events of that day were about to take on a life of their own. The boy's act of courage had sparked something in the community, and soon, the man's story would spread far beyond the walls of that grocery store. The woman who had confronted the man in the wheelchair left the grocery store in a storm of emotions. Her face burned with embarrassment, and her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel of her car. She drove aimlessly for a while, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite untangle. She hadn't planned to say those things. The words had just spilled out, fueled by a deep, simmering anger she couldn't fully explain. Now, as the adrenaline faded, she was left with a hollow feeling in her chest, a mix of shame and confusion. Her name was Margaret, and her life had been far from easy. She had grown up in a small, conservative town where prejudices were passed down like family heirlooms. Her parents had always been quick to judge others, and she had learned to do the same. But it wasn't just her upbringing that shaped her. Life had dealt her a series of blows that left her bitter and resentful. Years ago, she had been married to a man who promised her the world but left her with nothing but debt and heartache. After the divorce, she struggled to make ends meet, working long hours at a job she hated. She had no close friends, no family to lean on, and no one to share her burdens with. Over time, her loneliness turned into anger, and her anger turned into a shield she used to keep the world at bay. That day at the grocery store, something about the man in the wheelchair had triggered her. Maybe it was his calm demeanor, or the way he seemed to carry himself with a quiet dignity. Whatever it was, it had stirred something ugly inside her, a jealousy, perhaps, or a fear of being seen as weak. As she drove, her thoughts turned to the young boy who had stood up to her. His words had cut deeper than she cared to admit. "You're just being a bully," he had said. The truth in those words stung, and she found herself replaying the scene over and over in her mind. When she finally arrived home, she was greeted by the silence of her empty apartment. She sank into her worn-out armchair and stared at the wall, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than anger. She felt regret. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, her mind haunted by the man's face and the boy's words. She thought about her life, the choices she had made, the wall she had built, and the person she had become. Was this who she wanted to be? A bitter, lonely woman who lashed out at strangers? The next morning, she woke up with a heavy heart. She turned on the news, hoping to distract herself, but what she saw made her stomach churn. The incident at the grocery store had gone viral. Someone had recorded the confrontation on their phone and posted it online. The video was everywhere, and the comments were brutal. Disgusting behavior. She should be ashamed of herself. What kind of person treats someone like that? Margaret's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. She felt exposed, as if the whole world was judging her. But amidst the anger and condemnation, there were a few comments that stood out. I wonder what she's going through to act like that. Hurt people hurt people. Maybe she needs help, not hate. Those words struck a chord. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond redemption. Later that day, she received a call from a local community organization. They had seen the video and wanted to offer her support. We believe in second chances, the woman on the phone said. If you're willing to take a step toward change, we're here to help. Margaret hesitated. The idea of facing her own flaws was terrifying, but the thought of continuing down her current path was even worse. After a long pause, she whispered, I'll think about it. As she hung up the phone, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The young boy who had stood up to Margaret in the grocery store was named Tommy. He was 10 years old, with a mop of curly brown hair and a heart bigger than most people twice his age. Tommy had always been taught to stand up for what was right, no matter how hard it might be. That day at the store, he had been shopping with his mom when he heard Margaret's harsh words. At first, he had frozen, unsure of what to do. He had never seen someone be so mean in real life before. But as he watched the man in the wheelchair remain calm and dignified, something inside Tommy snapped. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing. When he stepped forward and told Margaret to stop, he didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about how she might react or what the other people in the store might say. He just knew it was the right thing to do. After the incident, Tommy's mom hugged him tightly and told him how proud she was. You did a brave thing today, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Not everyone would have had the courage to speak up like that. Tommy shrugged, feeling a little shy. I just didn't like how she was treating him, he said. It wasn't fair. When they got home, Tommy couldn't stop thinking about the man in the wheelchair. He wondered who he was and what his life was like. He wanted to know more about him, to understand why someone would treat him so badly. The next day at school, Tommy told his friends about what had happened. They listened with wide eyes, impressed by his bravery. His teacher overheard the conversation and asked Tommy if he would like to share the story with the class. Tommy hesitated at first, but then he nodded. He stood in front of the class and told them about the man, the woman, and what he had done. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before his classmates burst into applause. That was amazing, Tommy, one of his friends said. You're a hero, another added. Tommy felt a warm glow of pride, but he also felt something else, a sense of responsibility. He realized that standing up for what was right wasn't just a one-time thing. It was something he would have to keep doing, even when it was hard. That afternoon, Tommy's mom picked him up from school with exciting news. The video of the incident had gone viral, and people all over the country were talking about it. Tommy's act of courage had inspired others to speak out against discrimination and prejudice. You've started something really important, his mom said. People are looking up to you, Tommy. Tommy didn't quite know how to feel about that. He was just a kid, after all. But he also knew that even small actions could make a big difference. A few days later, Tommy and his mom decided to visit the man in the wheelchair. They found out where he lived through a mutual friend and brought him a small gift, a homemade card and a basket of cookies. When they arrived at his apartment, the man greeted them with a warm smile. "You must be Tommy," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Tommy shook his hand, feeling a little nervous. "I just wanted to say hi and see how you're doing," he said. The man's eyes softened. "I'm doing just fine, thanks to you," he said. "What you did that day, it meant a lot to me. Not many people would have had the courage to stand up like that." Tommy smiled, feeling a sense of pride and relief. "I just did what I thought was right," he said. The man nodded. "And that's what makes you special," he said. "Never stop standing up for what's right, Tommy. The world needs more people like you." As Tommy and his mom left the apartment that day, Tommy felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that life wasn't always fair, and that there would always be people who tried to bring others down. But he also knew that he had the power to make a difference, one small act of courage at a time. The video of the grocery store incident continued to spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, it had been shared thousands of times on social media, featured on local news channels, and even picked up by national outlets. People everywhere were talking about the man in the wheelchair, the woman who had humiliated him, and the young boy who had stood up for what was right. For the man, the attention was overwhelming. Strangers reached out to him with messages of support, thanking him for his service and praising his dignity in the face of adversity. Local organizations offered to help him in any way they could, from home repairs to financial assistance. Even the grocery store where the incident had taken place issued a public statement condemning the woman's behavior and offering the man free groceries for a year. But amidst the outpouring of kindness, there was also backlash. Margaret, the woman who had confronted him, became the target of intense criticism. Her name and face were plastered across the internet, and she received countless angry messages and threats. Some people called for her to be fired from her job, while others demanded that she face legal consequences. The man didn't feel good about any of it. While he appreciated the support, he couldn't help but feel sorry for Margaret. He knew what it was like to be judged and misunderstood, and he didn't want her to suffer more than she already had. One evening, as he sat at home with his service dog by his side, he decided to do something about it. He recorded a short video message and posted it online. "To everyone who has reached out to me, thank you," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Your kindness means more than I can say. But I want to ask for something. Please, stop attacking the woman who confronted me. What she did was wrong, but hate won't solve anything. Let's use this moment to come together, to learn from each other, and to be better. That's how we create real change." The video went viral almost instantly. People were moved by his compassion and humility, and many began to shift their focus from anger to understanding. Comments flooded in, praising the man for his wisdom and grace. Meanwhile, Margaret was struggling to cope with the fallout. She had deleted her social media accounts and was avoiding leaving her apartment. The hate mail kept coming, and she felt more alone than ever. But then she saw the man's video. At first, she couldn't believe it. How could he forgive her after what she had done? She replayed the video several times, her eyes filling with tears as she listened to his words. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness she had been living in. The next day, she reached out to the community organization that had offered her help. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "I want to change." The organization connected her with a counselor and a support group for people struggling with anger and prejudice. It wasn't easy. Margaret had to confront some hard truths about herself and the choices she had made. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. As for Tommy, he became a local hero. His school held a special assembly to honor his bravery, and he was invited to speak at community events about the importance of standing up for what's right. But despite all the attention, Tommy remained humble. He knew that his actions had started something bigger than himself, and he was determined to keep making a difference. The man, Margaret, and Tommy were all on their own journeys, but their paths were about to converge in a way none of them could have predicted. Margaret's journey toward redemption was not an easy one. The first few sessions with her counselor were painful. She had to confront the deep-seated prejudices and anger that had shaped her life for so long. It was uncomfortable, even humiliating at times, but she knew it was necessary. One of the hardest moments came when her counselor asked her to reflect on the grocery store incident. "Why do you think you reacted the way you did?" the counselor asked gently. Margaret hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know," she said at first. But as she thought about it, the truth began to surface. "I think I was jealous. He seemed so strong, so sure of himself. And I felt weak. I guess I wanted to make him feel small so I could feel bigger." The counselor nodded. "That's a brave admission," she said. "But you don't have to tear others down to build yourself up. You have value, Margaret. You just have to learn to see it." Those words stayed with Margaret long after the session ended. She began to realize that her anger and prejudice were rooted in her own insecurities and pain. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was also the first step toward healing. Meanwhile, the man in the wheelchair had been thinking about Margaret too. He had seen her name in the news and knew she was facing a lot of backlash. Despite everything, he felt compelled to reach out to her. One afternoon, he called the community organization that had been working with her and asked if they could arrange a meeting. When Margaret found out, she was stunned. "Why would he want to see me?" she asked the counselor. "Maybe he wants to understand," the counselor replied. "Or maybe he wants to offer you a chance to make things right. Either way, it's an opportunity." Margaret agreed to the meeting, though she was terrified. The day of the meeting, she dressed carefully, her hands shaking as she buttoned her coat. She arrived at the community center early and sat in the waiting room, her heart pounding. When the man wheeled himself into the room, Margaret stood up awkwardly. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi," he replied, his tone calm and steady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret took a deep breath. I don't know where to start," she said. "I'm so sorry for what I did. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong, and I hurt you, and her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands. The man nodded. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "It takes a lot of courage to apologize." Margaret looked up, surprised by his kindness. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I'm offering it anyway. Holding on to anger only hurts me in the end. I'd rather let it go and move forward." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "Just promise me you'll keep working on yourself. That's all I ask." Margaret nodded, wiping her tears. "I will," she said. "I promise." The meeting didn't magically fix everything, but it was a turning point. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a sense of hope. She began to attend her support group regularly, sharing her story and listening to others. Slowly but surely, she started to change. One day, she even reached out to Tommy's family. She wanted to apologize to him too, to thank him for standing up to her when no one else would. When Tommy answered the door, she knelt down to his level and looked him in the eye. "I'm sorry for what I said that day," she said. "You were brave to stand up to me, and I was wrong. Thank you for showing me that." Tommy smiled. "It's okay," he said. "I'm just glad you're trying to be better." Margaret's journey was far from over, but she was on the right path. And as she walked away from Tommy's house that day, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The ripple effects of the grocery store incident continued to spread, touching lives in ways no one could have anticipated. The man, Margaret, and Tommy had each taken steps toward healing, but their actions also inspired the broader community to come together in a powerful way. One evening, the man had an idea. He reached out to the community organization that had helped Margaret and proposed an event, a gathering to promote unity, understanding, and compassion. He wanted to create a space where people from all walks of life could come together to share their stories, learn from one another, and celebrate the strength of their community. The organization loved the idea and immediately began planning. They reached out to local leaders, schools, and businesses. And the response was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to be part of something positive, something that could bring people together after so much division. The event was held in a park on a sunny Saturday afternoon. There were food trucks, music, and booths where people could learn about local organizations and resources. But the heart of the event was the storytelling stage, where individuals from the community were invited to share their experiences. The man was the first to speak. He wheeled himself onto the stage and looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with gratitude. "A few months ago, something happened that changed my life," he began. "But it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. It showed me how much we need each other, how much we can learn from each other, and how powerful it is when we choose kindness over hate." He went on to share his story, his service, his injury, and his journey to rebuild his life. He talked about the incident at the grocery store and how it had taught him the importance of forgiveness and compassion. "We all make mistakes," he said. "But it's never too late to change, to grow, to be better. That's what today is about." The crowd erupted into applause, and many people wiped away tears. Next, Tommy took the stage. He looked small standing at the microphone, but his voice was strong. "I'm just a kid," he said, "but I know that even small actions can make a big difference. If you see someone being treated unfairly, don't be afraid to speak up. You never know how much it might mean to them." The audience cheered, and Tommy's mom beamed with pride from the front row. Finally, Margaret stepped onto the stage. She was nervous, her hands trembling as she gripped the microphone. But as she looked out at the crowd, she saw the man and Tommy smiling at her, and she felt a surge of courage. "I'm not proud of who I used to be," she began. "I let my pain and anger turn me into someone I didn't want to be. But thanks to the kindness and forgiveness of others, I'm learning to be better. I'm learning that it's never too late to change, and that we all have the power to make a difference." Her words were met with a standing ovation. People clapped and cheered, not just for her, but for the idea that anyone can change if they're willing to try. The rest of the day was filled with laughter, conversation, and connection. People who might never have spoken to each other before shared stories, exchanged phone numbers, and made plans to meet again. The event became a turning point for the community, a reminder of what they could achieve when they came together. As the sun set and the event came to an end, the man, Margaret, and Tommy stood together near the stage, watching the crowd disperse. "I never thought something like this could happen," Margaret said quietly. "Me neither," the man replied. "But I'm glad it did." Tommy grinned. "I knew it would work," he said. "People just needed a little push." The three of them laughed, and for a moment, it felt like anything was possible. In the weeks and months that followed the community event, the man's life took on a new purpose. He became a symbol of resilience and compassion, not just in his town, but across the country. Invitations poured in for him to speak at schools, veterans organizations, and community gatherings. He accepted as many as he could, using his platform to share his story and inspire others. One of his most memorable talks was at a high school. The auditorium was packed with students, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The man wheeled himself onto the stage and began to speak. "When I was your age, I thought I had it all figured out," he said. "I joined the military because I wanted to serve my country, to make a difference. And I did. But life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it knocks us down. The question is, what do we do when that happens?" He paused, letting the question sink in. "I'll tell you what I did. I got back up. Not right away, and not without help. But I learned that even when life takes something from you, it can't take your spirit unless you let it. And I learned that kindness and forgiveness are the most powerful tools we have." The students listened intently, some nodding, others wiping away tears. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Afterward, a group of students approached him, asking questions and sharing their own struggles. He listened to each one, offering encouragement and advice. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her journey of self-improvement. She became an active member of her support group, even mentoring others who were struggling with anger and prejudice. She also volunteered at the community center, helping to organize events and programs that promoted unity and understanding. One day, she approached the man after one of his talks. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "You didn't have to forgive me, but you did. And it changed my life." The man smiled. "You changed your own life," he said. "I just gave you a nudge." Tommy, too, continued to make a difference. He started a kindness club at his school, where students could share ideas for making their community a better place. The club organized food drives, cleanup days, and even a pen pal program with a school in another state. As the man reflected on everything that had happened, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced unimaginable challenges, but he had also experienced incredible kindness and support. He knew that his story wasn't just about him, it was about the power of community, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the possibility of redemption. One evening, as he sat by the window with his service dog at his feet, he thought about the legacy he wanted to leave behind. He didn't want to be remembered for his struggles or his disability. He wanted to be remembered for his resilience, his compassion, and his belief in the goodness of people. And he knew that, in some small way, he already was. The man sat on a park bench one crisp autumn morning, watching the leaves fall gently to the ground. His service dog lay beside him, content and calm. The park was quiet, save for the distant laughter of children playing and the occasional chirp of birds. It was a peaceful moment, one that allowed him to reflect on everything that had happened over the past year. He thought about the incident at the grocery store, the viral video, and the way it had brought so many people together. He thought about Margaret, who had gone from being his antagonist to someone he now considered a friend. He thought about Tommy, the brave young boy who had reminded him, and the world, that even the smallest voices can make a big difference. Most of all, he thought about the lessons he had learned and the ones he hoped to pass on. Life had taught him that pain and hardship are inevitable, but they don't have to define us. What defines us is how we respond to those challenges, with bitterness or with grace, with anger or with kindness. As he sat there, a young couple approached him. They recognized him from the news and asked if they could take a photo with him. He smiled and agreed, and as they chatted, the woman shared her own story of overcoming adversity. "You've inspired so many people," she said. "Including me." The man nodded humbly. "We all have the power to inspire," he said. "Sometimes it just takes one act of courage, one moment of kindness, to change someone's life." The couple thanked him and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts once more. He reached down to pet his dog, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew his journey wasn't over, there would always be more challenges to face, more lessons to learn, more people to help. But he also knew that he had made a difference, and that was enough. Later that day, he received a call from Tommy. The boy was excited to tell him about a new project his kindness club was working on, a community garden where people could grow their own food and come together to share meals. "That's a wonderful idea," the man said. "I'm proud of you, Tommy. You're changing the world, one small step at a time." Tommy laughed. "I learned it from you," he said. The man smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He realized then that his legacy wasn't just about the things he had done or the words he had spoken. It was about the people he had touched, the lives he had changed, and the ripple effect of kindness he had helped create. As the sun set that evening, the man sat by his window once more, his dog at his side. He thought about the future. Not just his own, but the future of the community he had come to love. He knew there would always be challenges, but he also knew there would always be hope. And with that thought, he felt a deep sense of peace. The lesson. Life is full of challenges, but it's also full of opportunities to make a difference. No matter who you are or what you've been through, you have the power to choose kindness, to stand up for what's right, and to inspire others. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen alone. It starts with one act of courage, one moment of compassion, and one person willing to take a stand. The man, Margaret, and Tommy each learned this lesson in their own way, and their stories remind us that it's never too late to change, to grow, and to make the world a better place. The end.